Okay, I'm really excited for tonight's professional learning session. This is our 12th professional learning session, and today we're joined by Lisa Maletich and Ashley Jeschelnig. Lisa is our Director of Special Education, and Ashley is a resource intervention specialist at the middle school, and they help our district get better each and every day. I'm excited about their topic, same but different, strategies and considerations for students with disabilities. I hope to learn a lot, and I really appreciate them taking the lead on this today. Lisa and Ashley, thanks for joining us today.
And thank you, Kelly, for the invitation. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to let you share your screen and go right ahead.
Great.
Maybe we might have some time for some question and answer towards the end.
Sure, sounds great. All righty. All right, well, our discussion today, our presentation is going to be on processing speed. And I know the overall topic was students with disabilities, but however, processing speed can be an issue for typical kids, typical adults, and gifted people as well. So it's kind of an all-encompassing topic that hopefully will hit home, and hopefully you'll gain some knowledge out of this and gain some strategies to use in the classroom as well. So processing speed, like I said, it could be fast, slow, it could be too fast, too slow, or just right, kind of like Goldilocks in the porridge. So overall today we're going to go over what is processing speed, what are skills related to it, how processing speed, how the brain affects processing speed, brain function, brain structure, just touching a little bit on that because it could go a little bit too deep sometimes. We'll also hear from Dr. Ellen Broughton. She is an expert in processing speed from the university or from Harvard Medical College. I have a YouTube video linked to her. We'll talk about what challenges can look like in the classroom and what strategies to use in the classroom. All right, so we'll get started.
So first up is, what is processing speed in general? I know before I went to school for special education, I just thought processing speed was how fast the kids can work, like a time test kind of, whereas it's actually the pace at which we can take in the information and understand it, which I think is the part that some people miss. Is when I'm working within a classroom, yes, the students are taking in the information that we're giving in the time that we're giving it, but are they truly understanding that information and then able to respond? We like to think of that as think time. That's a lot of what we refer to processing speed as within the classroom, is what is their think time? Something that I have learned through the years, everybody's think time in all three sections of processing speed is completely different. They might be extremely fast at verbal processing, and visually it takes a lot longer. So visual processing is visual. It's what they see. I think of this as note taking. Students that can take something from the board and then write down notes, how fast they can do that, if they can process it at the same time. A lot of these students are students that, if they struggle with visual processing, they need repetition of their directions. Something as simple as that is something that we see within the classroom. Verbal processing is how quickly they hear it. So I think of lectures, like if I am standing at the front of the classroom and Joey's in the back of the classroom, he might be hearing what I'm saying, but it's taking him 5 minutes compared to Susie, who's sitting next to him and is taking it right in. And then motor processing is fine motor, their speed. I think of this more within the actual gym class, but that also goes back to the visual processing of the copying notes from the board. But I also think of time tests. I know that math, we love to do multiplication time tests, and some of those students might know the math facts, but because we're only giving them a certain time frame, they struggle to get that down, and they also then start to panic.
Right, they're all kind of intertwined together. I remember a student who's far graduated by now, but his visual motor processing was in the superior range, yet his verbal processing was in the 60s, and he struggled in every area just because of that verbal processing. So, oh, sorry, there you go.
Processing speed is one of those executive functioning brain behaviors. The ones that I see the most within the classroom and I really focus on is the activation, the focus, the effort, and the memory. So we always are on kids constantly about keeping organized. That's actually one of the processing speeds part of it. Focusing. How many times do we tell kids to stay focused within class, or we tap on their desk to redirect them? Working memory and recall memory, that would be a lot of the reading aspect of it. When they're reading a book and they have to recall information at 7th grade, it would be like a textual evidence. They have to go back in and find something. That is then a recall on a lot of their processing. Visual, verbal, and motor, because it encompasses all of it. Their effort, although sometimes we like to think that the kids just don't always put effort in, but if their processing speed is affecting them, it can also affect their effort in the, especially with motor, with writing. Sometimes I have a student right now, for example, sometimes I just want to shake them and just say, come on, you can do it. But his motor processing speed is a lot slower than a typical student. Whereas you might have somebody who is gifted and flies through everything. And then we just want to keep giving them more and more, but it's just that their processing is so much faster than a typical student.
All right. This is the exciting part for me. So this talks about, just touches on processing speed and its relation to the brain. So basically, within our brain, there are cells called neurons. And information that we take in moves from neuron to neuron as sort of an electrical signal would. And when it moves from neuron to neuron, it also has to jump across a small space called the synapse. And kind of like just like a little ditch has to jump over. So there's been research lately, and there's a lot of it currently going on. Some is in the past, but most of it's pretty recent. They're finding that some people with slower processing speeds have larger than expected spaces between the neurons, or they have bigger ditches for that information to pass over. Because of some of the structures of part of that neuron called the dendrites having shorter arms or branches. And our neurons rely on those branches to move that information. So if they're short and stubby, it's going to take longer to jump to that next neuron. So another theory, scientists are studying how the thickness of the myelin sheath, the myelin coating, it's a fatty substance around the myelin within the neuron, could affect the processing speed. As kids get older, as they develop, the substance thickens. So they're thinking if it still stays thin, it could take longer for the brain to process the information for some reason. So our myelin sheath substance gets thicker as we develop, but then as we age, it gets thinner again. So that's why they're thinking maybe as people are much older, sometimes it takes them a little bit longer to take in that information and respond. Their processing just slows down a bit. Most people, not everyone, but. And some more information, when we learn new skills, especially as children, when we're it's like sponges ready to learn. The brain turns small roads, small pathways into larger networks or highways, I would call them. And the organizational efficiency happens a lot of time in the frontal lobe when we're talking about memory, when we're talking about impulse control, and when we're talking about the processing speed. So your processing the speed depends on how efficient those networks operate. So the more times a task or an activity or a skill is repeated and practiced, the more efficient the network becomes in that area of the brain. And it makes the neural networks more dense. That can increase the automaticity of a task, so you don't have to think too much before you do that task. It just becomes an automatic movement or automatic activity, and therefore the processing speed can increase or improve. So processing speed challenges, what could they look like in the classroom? Ashley, would you like to take this one?
Yeah. So for my classroom, being within the special ed classroom, sometimes it can look different than what a typical classroom or even a gifted classroom will look like. But for me, processing speed, they become overwhelmed very easily. If I ask them a question, we tend to think they freeze and they're not going to answer, whereas they're just trying to think it through and trying to come up with the best solution and understand exactly what we're talking about. So you always try to break it down as simple as can be into as many steps as possible to break it up. We always have those students that sit in the back classroom and, they're not raising their hand. We think they're not engaged. They might look it, but they're just trying to process it. I also think of it as those students when I am asking a question, you always have to pause for at least 3 minutes. And sometimes you're just like, all right, we can get there. But those are those students that are really struggling with the verbal processing. The students that are struggling with the notes, again, that's going to be a motor processing. Proofreading work at this level is huge, and being able to go back through and identifying their own errors. As much as we want to say, how to do this, how to do this, it's actually just them being able to visually look at it and process what is happening within their own writing. I also like to think of my students that have my test anxiety kiddos. That actually is a huge part of their processing that I have found throughout the years, that when I give them a chapter test, they know we have 90-minute classes. They want to get through as much as possible, and they start to stress out, which then affects their processing speed. I feel like at this level in the middle school, that's probably one of the biggest ones I see. We always like to put in IEPs chunking of materials because they avoid anything that looks big because it's overwhelming to them. Forgets necessary materials, that's going to be your organization part of it. The finish quickly, sometimes they just jot things down so that they don't stand out to the rest of the group, that they are struggling with some type of part of it. I also find that they struggle with interaction with peers. I know, we're teachers, we need to teach certain things, but they really struggle with being able to sit down and have a conversation with their peers and comprehend what their peer is saying and then be able to respond appropriately without that student thinking anything about them, and just building those basic relationships.
Right. All right, so what can we do to support our students? So I found, just by happenstance, a video, two portions of videos by Ellen Bratton, who works at Massachusetts General Hospital and also Harvard Medical School. And she's also the author of Bright Kids Who Can't Keep Up. And she has done a lot of extensive research and study in the area of processing speed. It's her specialty. So let's hear what she has to say.
Related to what I just said, are the kids given the opportunity to learn skills to the point where they can do something automatically? We're always faster at things that are automatic to us. Are these kind of new skills presented at a rate, an amount that allows them time to learn, and an amount that gives them enough information that doesn't overload him or her? Again, this is in the classroom, but it's also if you're doing therapy with a child, if they're in a group therapy experience, you gotta know, like, okay, am I giving this kid enough time to sort of process this? And am I maximizing their processing speed by getting them to think about what they already know about a skill or a topic? And are they given the opportunity to build upon that information in an organized fashion? And you may need to make those connections for them. Like sort of say, okay, now remember when we were talking about X, Y, or Z? How does this relate to that? Because building those connections, again, is going to somewhat speed up their ability to access that information. What we found is that there are certain teachers that work particularly well with these kids. So they're teachers who, and again, we haven't looked at parenting styles yet, but we think that it's probably similar. Willing to learn about the child's unique learning style. So any teacher who said, I'm willing to learn about what this kid brings to the classroom setting. Teachers with good senses of humor, being able to say, laugh things off. Doesn't mean getting the child off the hook, but being able to look at it, okay, you didn't get this done, let's figure out how to do this, but without being too mean and, I don't know, anal. The ability to change the tempo of the instruction that matches that child, that classroom environment, the ability to or the tendency to not expect a quick fix. And that's really, these kids are not even probably going to be fixed. Again, if we can't speed up a person's brain, we can't expect them to actually be fixed. Like I was mentioning, the ability to de-emphasize busy work and willing to adjust homework so that they learn the concepts, learn them fluently enough without being overloaded. So these are the kinds of kids that if it takes one child, the average child 30 minutes, it may take them an hour to do the same amount of homework. The ability to balance the needs of all the students with the specific needs of individual students. The tendency to be excited about technology in their classrooms. So to think about technology, like how can we make this work, or does this work, or how does this work? And then overall, the kinds of teachers that are organized but flexible. So not overly organized where they can't change plans, and not so flexible that everything's fine. I find sometimes parents are drawn to the teacher who is sort of that laid back, everything goes, everybody's favorite teacher in the elementary school. And sometimes those are great teachers, and oftentimes they're great teachers, of course, but sometimes they're great teachers for these kids. But if they're not organized, that tends to actually slow kids down. So even if and sometimes those teachers may be somewhat like these kids, and can relate to that and change the tempo of their instruction, but other times it's just too disorganized and they don't even know where to start, and they become that lost child that I talked about before. Characteristics of good school environments are these. So they tend to be school environments where there's open parent and teacher collaboration, where parents can say, oh my gosh, what happened last night at the dinner table or during homework time didn't work, and for teachers to be able to collaborate back and forth. A more positive emphasis on individual differences. So school environments where that's kind of acknowledged, cherished really, where different more specific strategies, having a second set of textbooks to keep at home so they don't have to remember, even when they're getting their locker in 6th grade, like, what do I need to bring home? Because they're not thinking like that. They have 2 minutes to catch the bus. That's a time suck for them, basically. They don't need to spend their time when they have to just remember even to bring home their coat, for example, as opposed to, I need social studies, I need English, I need that. Keep additional papers to a minimum, which is problematic because kids don't even have many textbooks anymore. So these kids, I find that as schools have changed from one textbook for social studies, one for English, now it's like lots of papers, lots of papers, lots of papers. It's actually slowed these kids down. Another reason why I think maybe they're having more problems. Like I talked about before, the availability of technology to limit handwriting, facilitate homework transfer from home to school. One website for all homework. Now, I don't know how common this is in this area of the country. In the Boston area, teachers all have their own websites. So if you're in middle school or high school, you may have 7 different websites that you have to check at night. That a lot of school systems haven't caught up with the idea that one sort of place to get everything is the way to go, either because they don't have the funding for it or it's just not a priority. So these kids are having to check, okay, my English teacher, they're in 10th grade, needs this, my history teacher needs that, and they're checking everybody's homework, it's a disaster for these kids. Even though you think it would make things faster, it really doesn't. It's really tough for them. Another thing that helps them a lot is to have a model of the finished product of the assignment, so they can sort of see, okay, what is it that it needs to look like? So I can start thinking ahead, okay, this is what it looks like. It doesn't matter what kind of assignment it is or what kind of goal you have, even if it's not school related. Here's our goal for your behavior. Here's what it would look like if you did X, Y, and Z at the end of this year. Here's what we're shooting for. Keeping that in mind is really important in terms of helping them develop a time frame too. Associated with that, kind of the beginning and the end point, where am I starting? Where am I ending up? Homework that's not redundant, I already talked about that, and worksheets that aren't visually overwhelming and confusing. Reducing the need for multitasking and providing help with note-taking is something that really, for any kid, out of all the things that I've mentioned, probably the one thing that every single kid benefits from who has this problem is help with note-taking. They just cannot take notes in a way that is fluent and a way that's going to help them. So they take notes, they're graded on their notes in some classes, they're not good at that, and then they're tested on those notes that they didn't even get the information that they need down. So giving them the information that they need so they can actually study well is important. In terms of social situations, I think, do I have like a few more minutes, right? Okay. In terms of social situations, simplifying social situations and providing guidance, allowing more time to process, limiting the number of social interactions, and teaching appropriate ways to ask for clarification, even for their peers, to be able to say, oh, wait a minute, what were the rules for that game again? Can you just say that one more time? That sort of thing, being able to clarify in social situations, in peer situations. Being able to scaffold for them. So I said, give them more time, limit the number. That doesn't mean that they just need one-on-one, but if there's a lot going on in a classroom or in an environment or in some kind of setting, being able to limit how many different permutations they have to do is helpful. Making sure they focus on the person who's talking. So teaching them, actually, you need to look at that person. You need to process what it is they're saying, because looking at them will definitely help them process that information more quickly. Of course, modeling appropriate behaviors too. And then providing support organizationally in the communication and the social realm, helping them organize their thoughts, helping them organize kind of their ability to process what happened in a particular social situation, and helping them understand, okay, when you're in this kind of a group setting, here's the stuff you really need to pay attention to, and here's the stuff you don't. And these are all things that they can learn, but don't necessarily come naturally to them, especially as time goes on, as social situations get more complicated. And I kind of said this already, helping the child to notice when social situations start to feel complicated, rather than putting pressure on him to keep up the pace, help them be more conscious of what's going on and to learn to observe, to learn to slow down. Also to recognize when the situation is becoming emotionally challenging for them, or emotionally hot, basically, because that's going to slow us down. When we get sort of anxious, or when things get like, oh my gosh, I wonder what's going on here, we tend to sort of slow down. So recognizing that, and so they can shift to more kind of calm environment to know that, okay, I just need to kind of let go here and be able to withdraw when that's a possibility. Also preparing them in advance. So if you know there's a situation coming up, it's going to be fast-paced, they're going to have to move really quickly, being able to sort of say, here's what to expect. And here's the things that you might not expect but might happen. And then having friends and adults nearby to provide prompts to facilitate communication. Oftentimes these kids sometimes have a best friend who's like the fast kid in the classroom. And so being able to pair them up with those kinds of kids is a good thing. Opposites do kind of attract.
Hey, Lisa, this is Kelly. I muted you because there was some echo with the video. I cannot unmute you, so I need you to unmute yourself. Everybody could hear the video, but I just muted your screen because it was playing twice.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for doing that, Kelly. All right. Okay. Back. Classroom strategies overview, just kind of just summarizing what some of she said. Consider the timing, provide extended time, limit the time to drills if possible, monitor the time spent on task, allow time for processing answers. You can decrease your rate of speaking, which is hard for some of us, I know. And monitor your tone. You know, these kids who process slowly might not quite get sarcasm because they're trying to interpret what you're saying, not just your tone, but the actual vocabulary that you're using. Like she said, provide a model of what the completed activity or task or project would look like. Ensure they understand the assignments, break them down into steps, like Ashley had mentioned a while back. Encourage and support, allow to use the computer when their handwriting is laborious. That could help speed up their written expression as well. Ashley, are any of these that you use in the classroom? Do you use any of these?
Pretty much all of them. I was going to add in there that she had mentioned the notes at the desk as well. That is huge for a lot of the kiddos, especially in the areas of history and science, because those seem to be a lot of lecture and take notes. So the notes at the desk really help the students as well, along with, as crazy as it seems, the organization piece is huge, especially in the middle school level. I think one of the biggest things that have helped, at least my students that I've seen and students in the past, is the use of Google Classroom, because we are now posting everything on there, even PDFs, so that if they lose it or they forget it, they're able to easily just go into their Google Classroom, which is all on one screen, which classroom they need to go to, and find it easily.
Nice, thank you. And that would conclude our presentation, and we have our resources listed here, and then and hopefully I spelled your name, Ashley, correctly.
Yeah.
I'll fix it. But that's our contact information if you'd like any additional information or any more resources.
Yeah, Ashley's the easy part of her name.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I have a couple questions, and I hope these don't come across as silly questions. But one, like the note taking, there was an emphasis on note taking. I would think that might be something that we point downstream, like, high school teachers. Well, that's the middle school teachers should teach note taking, and middle school teachers probably point down to intermediate, things like that. Should every teacher kind of review that, or I mean, do we need a class? I don't know really know how to address that. And then my other one is, it seems like there was a list of so many different things that might be helpful. Is there any way do we pass along that kind of information per individual? Like, hey, this is something you need to know about Lisa, or Ashley, like she's very visual or something.
Well, for the note taking, in this instance, I think they may have been referring to having the notes available to them. They can try to take their own notes, but because the processing, Ashley, jump in if I'm not correct, but because the processing is so much slower, they just can't keep up. So they have pre-written notes ahead of time. That way they can try to take their own, but they can always fall back on the pre-written ones. Does that sound accurate, Ashley?
Yes, and I was going to add, Kelly, you had mentioned, falling on each teacher. I know here at the middle school, for the most part, the teachers are pretty in line with how the note taking goes and what type. I know some use the Cornell notes and things like that. So they're pretty much in line. And I know at the beginning of every school year, they pretty much go over that stuff with the kiddos. And the intervention specialists are always there to assist as well with all of that stuff. And then as for like the reporting per kid, I know for IEP students, I will talk with the 6th grade RIS and then the 8th grade to kind of pass along those notes, like this person does a lot better in small group, or they do a lot better visually. So anything you can provide on their desk is a lot better for them. So we're in a lot of communication.
Excellent. Thank you both very much. Anyone else have a question for Ashley or Lisa? Great presentation. Thank you.
At the high school level, maybe some of that uniformity and method might be helpful. I know a couple of years back, Lori Scaff kind of gave us a little bit of outline of how to set up worksheets for some of her students, but that's probably been lost. And maybe if we had some commonality there, that might be a way for us to help our students in the classroom.
Between classes or between
Yes.
subjects, you mean? Okay.
Both.
Okay. Taking notes.
This might be something the different PLCs could address too.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, Eileen.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, I want to protect everybody's time. Amanda, Carol, Chelsea, anyone else have any other questions, comments, or takeaways they wanted to share? All right. You can always email Ashley or Lisa or contact me, and we can set up something. Maybe they can come to a PLC or a meeting, and we always have this video as reference. So Ashley, Lisa, I thank you so much. That took a lot of effort to get that presentation together, and I benefited, and I know everybody in the district will as well. So thank you both very much.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.